Dear Professor Nasser, Muhammad Arif, moderator, research and experts. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Ibrahim Zaabi. On behalf of Dr. Muhammad Abdullah Al-Ali, CEO of Trends Research and Advisory, it gives me a great pleasure to welcome you all to Trends' second annual Political Islam e-forum organized under the theme of Expansion Project of Muslim Brotherhood, extent of its decline and future prospects. The aim of the forum is to examine the developments that have taken place in the Muslim Brotherhood's projects, especially in terms of its decline and future prospects after the setback experienced by the group over the past few years. In this symposium titled The Muslim Brotherhood at the International Level, the Ambiguity is ambiguity of positions and confrontational measures, which is part of the forum. A group of outstanding researchers and experts in political Islam will discuss some important issues such as the status of the Muslim Brotherhood under the Biden's administration, European countries, strategies of confronting the Muslim Brotherhood, in importance of the Afghan situation on the future of the political Islam in general and the Muslim Brotherhood in particular, and the Brotherhood potential safe havens in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, the organization of the forum is required to Trends' commitment to promote the values of peace, tolerance, and fraternity by analyzing the extremist ideologies, whether inside or outside the Arab world. Trends seek and to spread the academic and scientific knowledge in the respect to raise awareness about the threats and risks posed by the ideologies to all societies. Allow me to conduct you with the following words of Dr. Muhammad Abdullah Al-Ali, CEO and founder of Trends Research and Advisory. We as a scientific research institution have become a reference to the field of political Islam. Ladies and gentlemen, your patience with us today motivate us further to achieve our goal. I welcome you all at Trends and look forward to hear your in-depth presentation and discussions about the symposium topic. Thank you very much for your academic assistance and participation in this symposium. Now I invite Professor Nasser Arif to moderate the proceeding of this symposium. Welcome, Professor Nasser.
Thank you, Mr. Ibrahim Zaabi. Thank you so much. Dear distinguished speakers, respected guests and viewers worldwide, thank you for joining Trends Symposium in Political Islam this afternoon. Actually, it is sometimes good morning in Western Hemisphere and afternoon in the Eastern Hemisphere. So good morning for some of you and good afternoon and good evening for some other guests and viewers around the world. This symposium comes to the second one to study deeply and academically the phenomenon of Muslim Brotherhood. The first one was in the domestic and the regional level, and this one in the international arena. The title of the symposium is Muslim Brotherhood at the international level, the ambiguity of positions and confrontational measures. Actually, the main issue here is Muslim Brotherhood a local phenomenon, or it is a more international phenomenon? So is it just political movement within specific societies, or a functional group which is being used to be utilized and will be utilized by superpowers or regional powers who are using them to accomplish their goals and to reach their own objectives in specific countries? I am honored to invite distinguished speakers today. I will start with Dr. Gillian Kennedy, lecturer in political and international relations, Liverholm Early Career Fellow, University of Southampton, United Kingdom. She will talk about possible heavens for the Muslim Brotherhood in the world. Dr. Gillian, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. And thank you for your introduction. Thank you for inviting me today to speak on this important topic. I hope that everyone can hear me firstly and the reception's okay. Before I speak safe havens for the Muslim Brotherhood, I'm going to talk about Turkey and the UK. I'm just going to try to give a bit of a background of why I suppose I study this topic. I did my PhD at King's College on the Muslim Brotherhood, and I started it before the Tahrir uprising in 2011. So that kind of changed the dynamics. And I lived in Egypt, in Cairo, in 2012 during the Morsi year of governance. So I did that. I did my PhD on that. And then obviously over the course of that time, by the time I finished my PhD, Morsi had been removed from power and we then had the new government, and the Muslim Brotherhood, I suppose essentially you say, disappeared off the agenda for a while. So then I started a postdoc at King's College back in 2017. And as part of that postdoc was basically looking what happened to the Muslim Brotherhood after the Arab Spring. Where did they go? When I say the Muslim Brotherhood, I mean specifically the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood. So that basically brought me to Istanbul. That was my first place where I went for research. And I went there, same with the UK, I traveled around for two main reasons. It's both the United Kingdom and Turkey when it comes to the political opportunity structure in both countries. And when it comes to existing Islamist networks, both countries provide a safe haven that's more inviting than pretty much most Western European states, I would say. And then a lot of Middle Eastern states would not be as hospitable than those two countries. So I started my research mainly, as I say, in Turkey, and I went to Istanbul and I traveled around Turkey a good bit. And it became fairly apparent quite quickly that not only was the government itself open and tolerant to the Muslim Brotherhood working there, whether it's through media organizations, civil society, religious organizations, educational organizations, but ideologically the government was quite sympathetic to the Muslim Brotherhood. And this filtered down into different organizations. So if you look at Turkey, it has a few organizations that are, I suppose you could say, I wouldn't say in partnership, but they certainly cooperate with Muslim Brotherhood offshoots. So for example, you have business organizations. There's the Association of Independent Industrialists and Businessmen, or for short, MUSAID, in Istanbul. But they work quite a lot, and they've done forums together. They've worked on research papers together with the Egyptian Business and Development Association that's called EBDA. And why is that important? EBDA was an organization that was set up during the Morsi year. It was run in Cairo at the time by leading members of the Muslim Brotherhood's finance office. So they're businessmen who work across the Middle East, often in the textile industry. And most of those leaders of EBDA then went, after Morsi was removed, then moved to Istanbul and moved their business there. So it's not just ideology that's really important to safe havens, it's also the opportunity structure. In this case, business is really important. So that's one area. And another area is to do with charities. And this is all about looking at the Muslim Brotherhood almost as a network and a social movement. So we have another group, an example being the International Humanitarian Relief Organization in Turkey. And they've been around for far, far longer than the Muslim Brotherhood have been based in Turkey. They often deal with things like the Red Crescent. They would do similar kind of crisis management across the world for predominantly Muslim majority affected episodes. And the International Humanitarian Relief Organization have worked with the Muslim Brotherhood and are quite supportive of them, and they'll help logistically when it comes to things like housing and jobs. And this is why Turkey and UK are classic examples of safe havens for the Muslim Brotherhood, because they provide not just the ideological support, which I think is important, more so in Turkey than in the UK, but the logistic support, which is very important for relocation and for helping the Muslim Brotherhood to, I suppose, to organize their different media outreach. So, for example, in Turkey, there's an area called Yanıboşna that's near the airport. It's around 20 minutes from Istanbul airport. And Yanıboşna has many offices for media organizations, but specifically it's got media offices where lots of Muslim Brotherhood organizations operate. So you have the likes of Rabah TV, Watan TV, Shark TV. They all operate from the same area. Like they'll literally be offices right beside each other and the same personnel who go in and out. There's also, let's say, there's research organizations. There's the Egyptian Group for Strategic and Political Studies. That's also a Muslim Brotherhood run organization. And they all operate there. Whereas other countries would not be, there may be Muslim Brotherhood members in other countries, like Germany, for example. I'm sure we're going to hear about it, but has lots of Muslim Brotherhood members. But Turkey is where the organization, the Egyptian wing of the organization anyway, it is the center of their operations. It is the center of their funding operations, their financial operations, center of their media operations. It's the center of the ideological outreach. That is pretty much the first stop where most exile members go to. So it's quite important and has been since 2012, but it's becoming a less stable safe haven for them because of the problems with the Turkish economy, because of the downturn in the Turkish lira, because of Erdogan's position with Gulf states. Basically, he needs to build a better partnership strategically with the Gulf states to improve the economy and to improve Turkey's security position vis-a-vis Assad and issues to do Islamic groups along the Turkish border. He has to basically mend fences, which ultimately means that now in the last 2 years, he's essentially been moving away from supporting the Muslim Brotherhood. The Brotherhood are still there in Turkey, but they're not getting the same forum that they had before. They're not appearing on media platforms with government ministers from the AKP that they used to pre-2016. So there's definitely a shift there. I could talk more about Turkey, and I probably will more in the Q&A, but I just want to quickly talk about the UK quickly before moving on. I know I'm conscious of running out of time. The UK is a really interesting example too, because the UK also facilitates the Muslim Brotherhood because of its history, because of existing networks, mainly in the UK. So, for example, the largest Islamic organization in the UK is called FOSIS. It's the Federation of Organization of Islamic Student Societies. And that has traditionally been a very friendly organization to Muslim Brotherhood exiles. Throughout the 70s and 80s and 90s, many of the senior people within FOSIS were from Egypt, were Muslim Brotherhood members openly as well, and there's nothing secret about this. Within some of the biggest Islamic organizations in the UK, you've got the Muslim Association of Britain, the Muslim Council of Britain. There will often be many statements, particularly over the last 10 years, that are very friendly towards the Muslim Brotherhood, highly critical of the Sisi government. So ideologically, these are very tolerant and friendly networks for Muslim Brotherhood members to join and to, I suppose, facilitates networking among them. Again, helps with things like jobs and homes. So, for example, in London, I've been to areas that have a lot of Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood members, like Wembley in North London is an area that's got lots of Muslim Brotherhood members. And they would often meet people in the local mosque there who will then connect them to organizations like FOSIS, if you're a younger student, or if you're older, to maybe the Muslim Council of Britain, who might help you facilitate a job or help you settle in the UK. So this is really important because this links to the political system in the UK. Although the Conservatives are in power, and this is why the Muslim Brotherhood gets short shrift here now, in the past, there are elements of the Labour Party, the far, far left of the Labour Party, the sort of part of the party that's the Corbyn-esque part, that's more anti-war, part of the Stop the War Alliance against the Iraq War, who would often be quite sympathetic to the Muslim Brotherhood and who would join them on protests. So, for example, when President Sisi came to the UK in 2014, Muslim Brotherhood members with the Stop the War coalition were outside Downing Street protesting. And again, these are sort of existing networks that exist in the UK that help the Muslim Brotherhood continue their operations, and then on an individual level, help members with jobs, with homes, with basic security. So it's not as important as Turkey as a safe haven, and certainly it's not as friendly as it used to be back in, I would say, maybe 5-6 years ago. post-Brexit, certainly, there's less MPs meeting up with Muslim Brotherhood members than there were in the past. But in a similar way to Turkey, it is still a really, really important base for the Muslim Brotherhood, for their exile, for their operations. And I think particularly for funding, it's very important in the UK when it comes to funding, less so for media operations, more to funding. So I suppose what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that these two case studies are really, really vitally important for both the finance, the media side of the Muslim Brotherhood operations, and their continued importance, trying to keep a continued importance. And that's mainly, as I say, for the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood specifically. I'm sure we'll hear about other case studies. But finally, my last point, both countries haven't, since 2016, 2017, both countries have been distancing themselves from the Muslim Brotherhood. And when I say both countries, I mean members of parliament in both countries. I mean, leading civil societies in both organizations in both countries have been distancing themselves from the Muslim Brotherhood and giving them less help, more and less opportunities to voice their criticism of the Sisi regime. So personally, I would say that the organization is in trouble. I don't think that it's the death of the Muslim Brotherhood. People often say that. I don't think we could say that at all. The Muslim Brotherhood is not dead, far from it. It still exists in little pockets in Bradford, in Birmingham, in North London, in Istanbul, in parts of Ankara, but it's not as powerful as it was, and it's not getting the same assistance that it used to get around 5 years ago. So I suppose that I will conclude my presentation. I've tried to fit a lot into a very small period of time. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it was informative.
Thank you, Dr. Gillian, for this informative and deep analysis of the both countries, the most important two countries who give safe haven for the Muslim Brotherhood, especially the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood. And I think there are many there. Emphasizing on the media and finance on one side, and some subtle political movement in UK on the other side. Still, the central bank of Muslim Brotherhood in Lugano and Malaysia is giving safe haven for human capital who are fleeing many accounts in Egypt. Thank you so much for this very deep approach and deep analysis. The second speaker is Mr. Konstantin Schreiber. Dr. Schreiber is Mr. Schreiber is a news anchor and Tigasso, ARD German TV. Did I say it right?
Which on? Yes, you did. ARD. ARD, we say in German.
Yeah. And he will speak about the Muslim Brotherhood's situation under the Biden administration. So please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Firstly, maybe also because it's important to know why I can speak on the topic, saying a few words about my background. I'm a news presenter in Germany, but at the same time, I've published a number of books on integration, Islam, Islamic movements, which were quite popular and successful in Germany. So that research for these books gives me the reason to, elaborate on the issue a bit, just for my personal background. And Julian Kennedy just said that the UK is an interesting example when it comes to the Muslim Brotherhood in the West, and I think so is Germany, but for different reasons, really. I think it's quite important in this context to look at the history of Islam in Germany, comparing it to other Western countries. Germany did not have a colonial empire on a par with other Western nations like France or the UK. There were some German colonies, most noteworthy in what is today Namibia, Cameroon, Tanzania, New Guinea, and some other parts, but they were relatively short-lived as Germany lost those colonies at the end of the World War I, and they did not generate tight links to Germany, as in the case of French or British colonies, through which these countries also came in touch with Muslim communities on the larger scale quite early on. We did not have this, so Muslim migration to Germany actually started after World War II with the arrival of what we call in German Gastarbeiter, workers who were brought in, particularly from Turkey to Germany to help build the economy. Of course, they brought with them their faith. Muslim communities started to grow in many parts of the countries. Mosques were being built that started roughly in the 1960s, and they started to organize themselves in what we call Vereine, which would translate into societies in English. Today, there are hundreds of those organizations, and estimates say more than 2,200 mosques, with the number growing rapidly. Some of the most visible, most influential organizations, I think it's very important to mention them because they are very influential at the moment. They are DİTİB, which is a religious organization directly funded by the Turkish government and operating in Germany. ZND, VIKZ, IGD, IGMG, just to name a few. I'm not going into details about who is representing what part of the Muslim community in Germany, but I'd rather focus on the question relating to today's topic. What about Muslim Brotherhood? In Germany, the Verfassungsschutz, which is the central intelligence agency, estimates there are roughly 1,000 to 1,500 people who belong to the Muslim Brotherhood today. And some of them belong to the organizations, to the official organizations operating in Germany, which I just mentioned. That started in 1958 with the mosques, or with the central mosque in Munich, which was being built at that time. And it's called IGD in German, which translates into Muslim community in Germany. It was renamed into German Muslim community at the end of 2018. And today they have 340 members and significantly more supporters, and they are considered the most important and central Muslim Brotherhood related organization in Germany. One of the founders took over the leadership for the first 10 years up to 1968, but then the IGD was firmly in the hands of the Muslim Brotherhood even beyond that. From 1984 to 1987, Mohammed Mahdi Akif, he was the head imam at the IZ Munich, which was the name of the institution at that time. He was an influential functionary of the movement and also the seventh supreme leader of the global Muslim Brotherhood later on. So he was operating back then in Germany, in Munich. And in addition to the well-known advocacy of the gradual introduction of Sharia law, Akif made a name for himself with his denial of the Holocaust, and even gave the Brotherhood's well-known anti-Semitism a new dimension when they put specific quotes on their website in German with regards to women's rights and sexuality, which caused quite an upheaval. Around 50 Islamic centers today cooperate closely with this headquarters in Munich, and numerous other mosques and houses of prayer are in contact with this mosque in Munich. Overall, the range is likely to be several 10,000 people of Muslim faith who can be reached through sermons, religious offers, lectures, and educational measures directly influenced by the Muslim Brotherhood today in Germany. Another example is the Abu Bakr Mosque, whose name was Barinu Bassoum. He was filmed inside the mosque, and he said on camera that it is okay killing in fields, and those who publicly renounce Islam. And also he was directly educated by people who were working for the Muslim Brotherhood. The Islamic Center in Aachen is another example. The Bilal Mosque, as it is called today, can also be traced back to the early 1960s when it comes to the connection to the Muslim Brotherhood. Issam al-Attar, at the time the head of the Syrian Muslim Brotherhood, wanted to escape the repression in his home country and settled in Aachen near the Technical University with numerous students from Arab countries. The Syrian Secret Service followed the activist to his adopted home into 1984. His wife was shot by a Syrian sailor in Aachen, and the attack was probably aimed at Issam himself. So this even led to violent attacks within Germany. There are numerous other examples. I don't want to give them all to you now, but a very important one is also the foundation of the so-called Central Council of Muslims in Germany, ZMD. They were founded in 1994 with considerable participation from the Muslim Brotherhood, related organizations like IGD, IZ Munich, and others I just mentioned. This is very important because today the Zentralrat der Muslime, as we call them in German, they play a very important role even publicly, because those are the ones who we as journalists ask for quotes, and we invite them to talk shows to talk about issues related to integration, Islam, Islamic movements. And at the same time, they are, I would not say infiltrated, but they are heavily influenced by personnel and by organizations that directly belong to the Muslim Brotherhood. So this was just like an overview about where we are in Germany when it comes to the organizational structures of MB operating here. So now this leads me to another question. So how do we deal with it as media organizations and as politics in our country? Because I think this is quite remarkable, because when you ask either journalists or politicians about what is Muslim Brotherhood, are they here, what are they doing, I would say 95% of those asked would not even be able to give a rough idea of what this is and what they are doing. It's virtually non-existent. When you read newspapers, when you watch TV in Germany, Muslim Brotherhood, it appears when we talk about Egypt or other countries in the Middle East, but it does not appear when we talk about like the role they play within our countries. They're unseen, they're unheard of, and I think this is quite remarkable, because I don't know why this is the case. Even when we talk about the Zentralrat der Muslime, which I just mentioned, with the head of the organization appearing frequently on talk shows and on TV. Well, I think there was a shift maybe in the last year that you would not see him that frequently or that often any longer, but I don't know why that is. I think it may be because of the corona crisis that attention has shifted away to another topic. But before that, I would not see that anyone even ask about the connection his organization has to like dubious and shady institutions with very difficult aims they are pursuing. So, and when it comes to politics, it's just absolutely the same. When we talk to, or I as a journalist talk to the Integrationsbeauftragte, which is the German term for the commissioner in charge of immigration, who forms part of the German government, I was pretty much surprised how little she knew about Islamic organizations in general operating in Germany, but also about Muslim Brotherhood in particular. Which leads me back to the question, why is that? So I think part of this, or part of the explanation, is what I said in the beginning, that Muslim migration to Germany is a very recent, quite recent phenomenon, that we have very little expertise on a political and journalistic level, because we simply didn't have to deal with it until quite recently. There are very few people who have in-depth knowledge about those difficult structures, because I mean, you have to differentiate between so many organizations, and you know so little about the backgrounds, that there are very few politicians and journalists until now who are really able to provide this background and to distinguish between, well, who is pursuing what aim when we look at the players operating within Germany. So I think this is one of the main examples. And on the other hand, it's very difficult to, or like what I observe as a journalist, it's becoming more difficult to operate or to report on the subject in a way that would not generate I would not say upheavals or major discussions, because there are so many people who have a feeling that when we talk about Muslim life in Germany, it's a fine line between criticism that is correct and important, and what we call Islamophobia or anti-Muslimic racism. So it has become very difficult to target these issues without being addressed by some people of being Islamophobic. So I see a trend that quite a few colleagues of mine, they refuse to work on these topics because they're afraid of the reactions they get. So I think there's a layer of reasons why the Muslim Brotherhood can actually operate quite freely in Germany, far away from the public eye, because politics and media, they don't really report or look at what they are doing here. Quite a recent example, just to mention this one, because I've read it yesterday in the newspaper in Germany, which is called Welt newspaper, World newspaper. They were doing quite an interesting research, because Muslim Brotherhood organizations apparently bought properties in Berlin worth millions and millions of euros and installed their mosques and kindergartens and schools and centers for women, like they have apparently done in the UK before in some areas. So this is now being done in Germany, and they can do that quite, quite untackled, because, like I said, there are very few people actually addressing these issues. Now, the topic of my contribution today, or the title was, connected to our policies towards the US, or how we actually address this under the Biden administration. I just would mention that briefly, or elaborate on this quite briefly, because I think the answer to this is closely connected to what I just said. Without the issue being on the agenda, it is very difficult for German politics to contribute to any international effort to fight extremism, like in the case of the Muslim Brotherhood. In our case, one other thing I'd like to mention, which is very important from my point of view, is the financial issue, because also as a journalist, when I was trying to do some research into the structures and organizations behind the Islamic extremism in Germany, I found it extremely difficult to get any information on the financial sources of those organizations, because here we have very, very strict measures to protect organizations from being urged to open up on their financial resources. So it makes it very difficult also for official institutions or for the government to look at those sources to find out who is financing who. We know that in the case of DITEB, the Turkish organization operating in Germany, which I mentioned in the beginning, which is directly funded by the Turkish government. We know that they are sending imams to Germany. They are educated in Turkey. They send them here. They send them to Turkish mosques in Germany. So apparently this is also all financed by the Turkish government, but in other cases we simply don't know that. We're seeing mosques being built, huge lavish mosques, I mean, marble and golden everywhere, and when we ask them, well, where does the money come from, they say it's donations from our members. And you look at those members and they are, I mean, Syrian refugees living in those communities, and you wonder, well, what donors shall that be and where shall donations come from? But there are no means to force those organizations to open up on their financial resources, which makes it extremely difficult. I think this would be one of the most urgent issues to tackle on an international level, to find a way to get better knowledge about the financial backgrounds of organizations operating in Western countries. So I'm very much looking forward to the Q&A later on. I don't want to, put too much content into too little time. I hope this gave you an overview about where we are in Germany when it comes to Muslim Brotherhood and what problems I see specifically to our country.
Thank you, Mr. Schreiber, for this interesting, informative presentation. I think it is just an opening for a long discussion from the audience. Hopefully they will raise some questions, especially Germany was like the hardware of the Muslim Brothers, where the main leaders of the Muslim Brother were settled there.
Yes.
Mahdi Akif, Saeed Ramadan, Assam al-Attar, and Hussam al-Attar was in Aachen, was just the founder of a new group called the Pioneers of Islam, or the Precursors of Islam, Tala'i' al-Islam, from which all the leaders of and the anchors, the main anchors in the Jazeera network, including Waddah Khamfar and Mustafa al-Murabit and others, were members of Hussam al-Attar as a group, who were just preparing a new, or training a new generation who will lead the Muslim Brotherhood in particular, and Islamic world in general for the future. This was very, very important, dangerous, so to speak, segment and or episode in the history of the Muslim Brotherhood in Europe. UK is, attracting the attention because of the political role of the UK, but in Germany was the hardware, where the presentation used to, or the exhibition used to be done in London, and the manufacture in Aachen and in Munich and Berlin and others. Thank you so much for your interesting, and hopefully it will open more discussion to come, whether in this symposium or on future symposiums. Thank you. Next speaker is Dr. Iman Ragab. Dr. Iman is the head of the Security and Military Studies Unit at the Al-Ahram Center for Political and Strategic Studies. She's also visiting professor of political science at the American University in Cairo. Her topic will be repercussions of the Afghan situation in the future political Islam movement, the case of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is very important one and will attract more attention. The Afghan situation is part of the discussion now. Dr. Iman, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Dr. Nasr. I hope my voice is very clear for you. I would like also to thank Stern Center for this invitation to take part in this forum. I will start with giving you a background of myself, just to understand where my analysis of the topic is coming from. My PhD was on violent non-state actors in the MENA region, and I actually did many field research, and I focused in my dissertation on both Hezbollah and Hamas. Beside that, I'm already an expert in security policies in the MENA region, with the experience of around 17 years working on these issues. So as a start to discuss the repercussion of the Afghan development on the future of the Muslim Brotherhood, I would like first to put into perspective what is going on in Afghanistan from my point of view. Taliban, as one of the violent non-state actors, is actually taking control of this new structure of the Afghan state that has been developed since 2002 by the American administrations. And this group, after taking over Afghanistan, is expected to introduce to the Middle East region an Islamic Sunni regime that may, in a way or another, counterbalance the Shiite regime in Iran. This development is actually being supported by the Joe Biden administration, as well as a number of European countries, who believes in the importance of empowering political Islamic groups in order to achieve stability and security in the MENA region. Having that said, the question of the implications of that on the Middle East in general and on the Muslim Brotherhood in particular is gaining importance. And I think there could be three implications for such a development. The first implication, in my point of view, is the renewal of the political ambition of the Muslim Brotherhood in a number of countries in the region. And to understand this implication correctly, I may remind you with a number of the developments that took place in the region since 2011, where the Muslim Brotherhood in countries like Egypt, Tunisia, as well as Syria, uncovered their political ambition of establishing an Islamic governments, as well as Sunni Islamic states. The first step toward achieving that objective amidst the Arab Spring was to take control of the governments in both Egypt and Tunisia through elections. But as the developments afterward tells us that the revolution in Egypt in 2013 put an end to the achievement of that and political ambition, at least in Egypt. And recently we are witnessing the weakening of the political appeal of the Muslim Brotherhood in Tunisia and other parts in the region. Since then, I think the Muslim Brotherhood and other Islamic groups, in particularly in North Africa, are being in a massive crisis. And in this context, the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan might be like a life kiss for the political ambition of the Muslim Brotherhood. And this might explain why some of the political parties affiliated to the Muslim Brotherhood congratulated Taliban for taking over Afghanistan. And I may share with you the example of the Sudan's Popular Congress Party, who's known for its affiliation to the Muslim Brotherhood. And this renewal of the political ambition of the Muslim Brotherhood in the coming few years actually is based on the fact that Gillian has already touched upon, as well as Christian before me, that there is this socio-economic infrastructure of the Muslim Brotherhood that remain intact, and in some countries of the region, it's getting larger and bigger. The second implication for the Taliban takeover Afghanistan and the future of the Muslim Brotherhood, I call it the desecuritization of the Muslim Brotherhood. I mean by that, since 2013, there are a number of countries in the Middle East who consider the Muslim Brotherhood a security issue, a threat to national security and to the stability in the Middle East in general. I think the Afghan development actually is turning or reframing the Muslim Brotherhood in many security institutions in Europe and the United States and in some of the countries in the region to consider the Muslim Brotherhood no longer a security issue. Instead, it is a political movement or an opposition movement that is offering and providing to the public an alternative political project to the project of the ruling regimes in many Arab countries. The third implication, actually, I think, is the weakening of the national and regional counterterrorism efforts by many countries in the region, especially the terrorism practiced by the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and other countries in the region. I think that if Taliban managed to, after taking over Afghanistan, if it managed to moderate, this would revive the old or traditional debate that has been dominating policy-making circles in Europe and the United States for a while, which distinguish between two camps of Islamic groups. The first camp has been labeled as the acceptable, non-violent extremists. The second camp is the unacceptable, violent extremists. And this distinction, I have to say, does not reflect as it is being discussed in Europe and the United States in the different security policy-making institutions in the region. The violent extremists used to, as part of this debate, used to include Taliban, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, while the moderate or the acceptable non-violent extremists used to include the Salafi groups, the Muslim Brotherhoods, and all other Sunni Islamists. This distinction recently has been dominating many policy-making circles in Europe and as well as in the American administration, which would lead, in my opinion, could lead to the acceptance of the political and social aspect of the Muslim Brotherhood as a competitor or an opposition group to the ruling regimes in many countries in the Middle East. I argue that this third final implication, which is just to remind you of that, the weakening of the national and regional counterterrorism policies against the Muslim Brotherhoods in the MENA region, actually might have its own reflections on the security policies in the Middle East in general. And I may identify this reflection in three main aspects. The first aspect is that the countries in the Middle East is not going to trust the United States anymore, or any of the European countries who consider the Muslim Brotherhood as an acceptable non-violent extremist groups, because there is this impression in many of the Arab countries who are concerned with the increasing or the revival of the political ambition of the Muslim Brotherhood, that the Europeans as well as the Americans are not serious in understanding the threat posed by the Muslim Brotherhood to the national security of many countries in the region. The second aspect of this reflection would be the redefinition of the balance of power in the region. And I think this redefinition would be in favor of increasing influence of Turkey and Qatar, who are considered as the main heavens or supporters of the empowerment of the Muslim Brotherhood as well as other Islamic groups. Final aspect is that the pressure that many countries in the region who used to consider the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization, and namely UAE, the United Arab Emirates, as well as the Arab Republic of Egypt, those two countries actually has developed since 2011 clear policies based on a unitary vision of all extremists and radical Islamic groups as terrorists. And these two governments, as well as others in the region, consider these policies necessary to protecting their national security and to achieve stability in the Middle East in general. Consequently, I think the NATO state and other European countries began to exert pressures on countries in the region to change their policies towards the Muslim Brotherhood from considering and designating them as terrorist organization to dealing with them as opposition or political social movements. This would weaken national and regional security in the MENA region. With that, I end my contribution, and I hope you find it useful to the discussion of the e-forum, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Iman, for this interesting approach of dealing with the Afghan, Taliban taking over in Afghanistan. It is different from many approaches which emphasize more on the Afghanistan as a role model for the Muslim brother groups who are looking forward to defeat their enemies from minor or small states. If the Taliban could defeat the United States and take over. So it is encouraging, case or model for Muslim brothers in any country in the MENA region or beyond to do the same or to repeat the same. And as some other, researchers and contributors to this same subject were afraid that the Taliban could create a safe haven. We go back to Dr. Kennedy's presentation. Afghanistan will be a safe haven in the future for Muslim brothers who are fleeing, hard to flee their own countries under the pressure of the security. Thank you, Dr. Iman, for raising all of this question, and hopefully it will encourage more audience to raise questions. The last but not least, my relative or my Dr. Rami Aziz, we got to know that we are coming from the same place in Egypt. Yeah. So I had this kind of privilege to change the schedule and he himself volunteered to take the last speech. Dr. Rami Aziz is a research fellow at the Institute of the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy in Italy. His speech is Europe and strategies for confronting the Muslim Brotherhood. Dr. Rami, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Professor Nasser. Thanks for having me here in this important event. Trends recently became one of the most prominent places if policymaker and researcher, scholar around the world want us to understand more about political Islam. Thanks for your humility, and really today I'm going to speak about the European strategy to confront this Muslim Brotherhood. But to understand that, we need to grab a historical overview about the Muslim Brotherhood in Europe and their main activities, and after that we can figure out the most right strategies that European countries can adapt to face the threat of the Muslim Brotherhood. So I will start with a historical background about the existence of Muslim Brotherhood in Europe. In my presentation, I will address three major questions. Number one, does the Muslim Brotherhood seek to Islamize or Ikhwanize Europe? Second question, what are their tools? What are the Muslim Brotherhood tools to achieve control over Europe? And the third one, what is the most European strategies, or what Europe have to do to face or confront the Muslim Brotherhood threat? Here I will answer the first two questions. But to answer the first two questions, we must review the activities, the tools of the Muslim Brotherhood. I dropped the historical part, I'm so sorry. I will back to the historical part. As the presence of the Muslim Brotherhood in Europe dates back to the 50s of last century after they fled from Egypt and other Arab countries following their famous clash with Jamal Abdel Nasser as a result of their attempt to seize power by force. The first generation of the Muslim Brotherhood in Europe consisted of students and refugees, those who found the fragmented Islamic societies in Europe, most of them from the Balkan countries and Eastern Europe. And here, the Muslim Brotherhood realized the importance of establishing mosques. And the first mosques that the Brotherhood established were the Munich Mosque and the Islamic Center in Geneva, in which Saeed Ramadan, Al-Banna's son-in-law, played a major role in their establishment. Later, the industrial boom that Europe witnessed during the second half of the 20th century led to an increase in the number of the Muslim immigrants to Europe, which in turn led to an increase in the activities of Muslim Brotherhood and the expansion of establishment of their bodies and institutions, so that they could control new immigrants from the Muslim countries and work to integrate them not into European atmosphere, but integrate these newcomers, Muslim immigrants from the Muslim world, into the Muslim Brotherhood community in Europe. Back to the two questions that I just referred to. Here to answer this question, we must review the activities and tools of the Muslim Brotherhood in Europe as follows. In my humble opinion, there is three measures fields the Muslim Brotherhood are active in Europe. Number one is the religious activity, between two quotations is fatwa, social activities, between two quotations is mosques, hijab and halal, and political activity. For the first one, religious activity for fatwa, in addition to the large number of mosques controlled by the Muslim Brotherhood in Europe, the Muslim Brotherhood established the European Council for Research and Fatwa, through which they can issue fatwas to ensure control over the various aspects of life for the Muslim communities in Europe, such as food, clothing, financial transaction, the relationship between Muslim and their countries in which they are located. And the last one is the most important and sensitive one. For the social activities, mosques, hijab, halal, for mosques, since the arrival of the Muslim Brotherhood in Europe, they have been establishing mosques so that they can gather Muslim minorities, ensure control over them, and they present themselves to the Western governments as a group that cannot be ignored. Over time, the mosques controlled by the Brotherhood turned into so-called Islamic centers, which provide many social services for the Muslim communities, such courses in Arabic language, memorizing Quran, scouting activities, and religious lessons. Of course, all these activities are carried out according to the vision and the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood. In addition to the mosques, there are Islamic schools. Islamic schools played a very important role for the Muslim Brotherhood because that guarantees the control over the future or the next future generation of the Muslim in European country and hinders their integration into European society around them. The second one in this axis about the social activities is hijab. Hijab, or the veil. In fact, the Brotherhood used the veil as a sacred religious symbol expressing the Islamic identity of the Muslim minorities in Europe as a kind of a challenge to the European identity. Halal food, for sure, halal there's no problem with halal food because Muslims have the right to seeking for halal food, but the problem here, even the Muslim Brotherhood used the halal as another scared symbol, religious symbol to expressing the Islamic identity of Muslim minorities in Europe and a kind of a challenge for the European identity. Not only that, but as a major the major source for income to finance their activities. Let us here say that the halal trade volume around the world reached up in 2017 up to $2,300 billion. We are talking about $2.3 trillion. It's a huge number indeed. For the political activities, after the Muslim Brotherhood getting control over the Muslim communities and through the mosques, through the NGOs, through the schools and this huge network of social bodies, the Muslim Brotherhood exploited their control over Muslim societies in Europe through the network of mosques, schools, and a large number of NGOs. to present themselves to the Western governments as the official spokesperson and representative of Islam and Muslim. Here is the most dangerous point. They linked themselves to Islam as a religion. They consider and presented themselves to the West as spokespersons on behalf not only Muslim community, but they speak on behalf of Islam itself as a religion. Because that is, in my humble opinion, is the most dangerous point here in this narrative. So that is mean any criticism or action against them is considered and direct action or criticism against Islam itself. So the third axis here, or the third question here in my presentation, what should Europe do to confront the threat of the Muslim Brotherhood? Fortunately, there is a kind of a state of agreement among the European countries about the dangers of the Muslim Brotherhood. And that despite the efforts of the Brotherhood in Europe over the past decades to present itself as a group that believes in political path and doesn't believe in violence, but the behavior of the Muslim Brotherhood in Middle East during and after what's called the Arab Spring show the truth about them, is that the Brotherhood believe in violence in order to gain or maintain in power, and the Brotherhood doesn't abandon or doesn't getting away from using violence. It's one of the most important feature for them when it's come to getting power or maintain in power. Okay, here the question about how we can find effective European strategy to confront the Muslim Brotherhood threat in Europe or in European Union in general. In my humble opinion, based on my study to the case of the Muslim Brotherhood and their ideology, we can say European countries must firstly to stop dealing with the Muslim Brotherhood as Islam itself. They have to differentiate between the Muslim Brotherhood and Islam, because there is a big difference between Islam as a religion and the Muslim Brotherhood, which will allow European countries to develop the arsenal of European laws in terms of combating terrorism and extremism effectively away from any political correctness form. Secondly, European countries must know that there is a difference between hatred of Muslims and Islamophobia. Hatred of Muslims is a fact and exists in Europe. It's committed by some extremist current in Europe against Muslims, but Islamophobia is a tool invented by the Muslim Brotherhood to silence any voice that can criticize and tell the truth about them. The third element here is that educational materials provided by the Muslim Brotherhood in their mosques and their schools must be subject to review by a specialized educational authority in the European country to ensure that they are free from extremism or hate speech against the other people. Like my colleagues from Germany refers that in Germany, the Muslim Brotherhood is spreading in their website, in their mosques, in their an institution, anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial and other forms of hatred, for sure, against LGBT and other groups in society. The fourth element is to stop receiving donation and external fund for the mosques and Islamic centers affiliated with the Brotherhood, and allowed only donation and fund from within the European country itself with an audit of the source of the donation and fund. Even here, as my German colleagues said, that there is a luxury building, and when they asked it, from where you get this money, they said from our community. And when you look deeply in this community, you'll find a vulnerable people came as refugees. They almost in welfare system in Germany. So not only prevent receiving money from abroad, but you have to make a deep audit about the donation even from inside. Because they can manipulate by this donation. Fifth element, not allowing the Muslim Brotherhood NGOs and institutions that are located in Europe to host personalities who are involved or / incited in acts of violence and terrorism in other countries under the freedom of expression. Here I'd like to refer to what my colleagues from UK said about the Egyptian front who are living in Istanbul recently. Yes, Istanbul started to ask them to leave or to be silent, but yesterday, for instance, Mu'taz Matar the most prominent TV host, he announces that he will leave to UK. That is mean he will start again his incite against Egypt, against Malawi, and against as a president of Egypt from UK, and nobody will be able to stop him because he will pretext by the freedom of expression. So here recently, we can pointed out the France and Austria experiment about facing as the threat of the Muslim Brotherhood, because recently France issued a very important laws that can be viewed as the best strategy model for confronting the influence and penetration of the Muslim Brotherhood in Europe. It's called anti-separatist law in France, which aims to remove the obstacles from the path of the Muslim society to enable them to become part of French society by respecting the values of the Republic. Also in Austria, laws banning the activities and slogan of the Muslim Brotherhood is a unique experience which the rest of Europe should to be followed. To conclude the situation and the strategy and the aims of Muslim Brotherhood, I can say the Muslim Brotherhood arrived in Europe and working in spreading through small groups and students. Then they expanded and extended their influence on the Muslim immigrant community that came from Europe due to Europe's need for workers. And Muslim Brotherhood control over the Muslim community in Europe was achieved through a network of mosques, schools, NGOs that intervened in various aspects of Muslim life in their new European countries. They stood as a wall against any trial of integration of Muslim communities in European atmosphere under the slogan of protecting the Islamic identity, which hindered and fueled all the efforts made by European countries to integrate Muslim in their new countries. Even those Muslims who represent generation born in European countries and have never visited their origin countries, the Brotherhood succeeded through a strict religious and educational system to isolate them from their European atmosphere, which they only know the Muslim Brotherhood in the West has also succeeded to deceiving European politician and policymaker and European institution as they are a spokesperson of Muslim in Europe, and that and that they are the group best able to play the role of mediator between European government and Muslim community to integrate Muslim and prevent the spread of extremism, which made benefits politically and financially from the fund allocated by European institution and government for these goals, which is not true because the Muslim Brotherhood's mosques, schools, and institutions in Europe are a major source for dissemination of extremist ideology. Let me give an example that Muhammad Atta is the mastermind of September 11 attacks, was a frequent visitor of Munich Mosque as the first Muslim Brotherhood mosque in Europe. Here we need to shed light about the increasing of the Muslim population in Europe in the future and how the Muslim Brotherhood will exploit that. With increasing frequency of immigration from Muslim countries to Europe as a result of ongoing conflict in Middle East and the decreased number of European people themselves, the Muslim Brotherhood in Europe will become increasingly active in attracting more Muslims to their side. According to a Pew Research Center statistic about the percentage of the Muslim communities in the future, a Pew Research Center statistics said that in 2050, the number of the Muslims in Europe will reach approximately 75 million. It will be about 25% of the total population in Europe. Taking into account the decrease in the birth rate among Europeans, Muslims shall represent high percentages of the total population in some countries. Let me give you an example. In Sweden, for example, as a Muslim percentage of total population, it will be about 30.6 of the total population. In European countries with large populations such as Germany, France, Britain, and Italy, the percentage of the total, the Muslim of the total population in the country shall be as follows, respectively, 19.7, 18, 70.2, and 40. This gives an indication of the extent of the changes that will take place in this democratic society that rely on election as a means of governance, where Muslims will have, or between two quotations, the Muslim brother will use the Muslim, that they will have a significant voting bloc through which they can change in the law of the countries, of these countries, to become more compatible with Islamic Sharia. And this explains why Brotherhood is working hardly to spread their ideology among the Muslim communities. And here, the answer for the question we just asked at the beginning. So the Muslim Brotherhood, they are not keen about spreading Islam between the Muslim communities. They are keen about spreading Muslim Brotherhood ideology. So they are Ikhwanization in Europe, not Islamization in Europe. So here at the end, I can say the Brotherhood has predetermined plans to acquire Europe as an important part of the world. Getting Europe will enable them to reach their final project, establishing the global Islamic state or caliphate. The Brotherhood's action in this regard may seem slow, but they will pay off in the long run, especially in light of demographic changes previously referred to. In the West, the Brotherhood is now executing the empowerment phase that requires them to appear, conduct dialogue, and show weakness. But when they occur as a required power, their behavior will change completely. All what politicians and policymakers in Europe needs is to take a good look at the history of the Brotherhood from its inception till now, and add the history of their struggle for power and fighting for power and behavior when they get power. Egypt as a clear example and model after Arab Spring, so that they can predict the behavior of the Brotherhood and their action in Europe in the future, where there is no difference, because there is no difference between the Brotherhood in Europe and those outside. They all follow the same ideology. Earlier understanding for the Brotherhood by decision makers and policymakers in Europe will enable them to formulate appropriate mechanism and strategy capable of avoiding the dark scenarios that Europe will witness at the hands of that fundamentalist group in the future. I will stop here. Thanking for listening.
Thank you for this descriptive and prescriptive approach. So not stopping at describing what is there, but giving some insights in how to deal with this situation and this phenomenon in an European country. I have some questions here. I will take the liberty to send this question to specific speakers. First one was about the Muslim Brother propaganda and European country. The question says that the European country is trapped between the undisputable doctrine of a freedom of speech and a freedom of expression on one hand, and the Muslim brothers on the other hand, and they cannot confront this propaganda based on the doctrines of freedom of speech and freedom of expression. And this will be for Mr. Konstantin Schreiber, please.
You mean how the two sides of freedom of speech on the one side and the
propaganda on the other side? Is European country able to, overcome this kind of gap or this kind of confrontation and reach one point to confront the propaganda? Is it foreseeable?
That's a good question. I mean, first of all, to achieve that, you would have to be, outspoken about the problem, and I don't see that in the beginning. To the contrary, I see that there are lots of efforts to make it even more difficult to speak about certain problems and developments that we see at the moment. Coming back to the point of Islamophobia and anti-Muslimic racism, I came across, I don't remember how this award is called or how the I think it's not an award, but like each year an institution Austria, which is closely connected to the Muslim Brotherhood, apparently, they choose people who have become very prominent because they were so-called Islamophobic or anti-Muslimic personalities, be it from politics or journalism. So they issue a like a list of names each year of people who they accuse of being Islamophobic. And I just noticed that many people, particularly on social media, they don't question the validity of this list, but they just retweet it and they post it. And some of them, I think, they don't even have an idea of what this institution is and what the background of the institution is. So, and we didn't really talk about social media and its role in promoting certain voices, because also from what I see in Germany, and they tag me sometimes on Twitter and on Facebook and so on, people who frequently get retweeted and quoted by journalists, also by politicians. And when you dig into their background, you find out that they are really like shady people. But they get quoted because just on Twitter, you don't really see what they are, who they are and what their background is. It's easy to reproduce certain allegations and certain statements by people on social media without even being aware of who you are retweeting. And I think this is a big problem. And certainly this is why I mentioned this institute in Austria, because they play on this very smartly in a way, because they issue like statements after statements and puts them on social media, and sometimes the names they give themselves and their institutions, they are very misleading. Also, when we talk about something like Islamic Relief, I think it's called, the organization, it sounds good, it sounds positive, and people who are not aware of what they are posting and retweeting, they think, okay, I'm doing something, or I'm posting something that comes from a good source or someone with a, with a good intention. But this is not, well, obviously it's not the case, and it makes it very difficult at one point because you are the one working against this, and it becomes very, very difficult at a certain point. And I don't really see that we come closer to a level where we can address certain developments freely, but to the contrary, it makes it even, they make it even more and more difficult. So I don't see how this interaction between opinion, freedom of opinion, freedom of speech, and the propaganda that we see online is being addressed. No, to the contrary. I think people who are working in this area, they just pull out because it becomes so difficult and annoying.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for clarifying this point. Dr. Kennedy, do you think it is possible for European countries? I know that UK Brexit is out of European Union now, so but at least there is some kind of foreseeable point that they can reach domestic policies that confront the penetration of the Muslim Brothers and their manipulation of the legal system there to establish institutions and NGOs and to make themselves legal utilizing the gaps here and there for union, for NGOs, for students, organization, and so on. Is there any kind of, foreseeable point that they can reach a common domestic policies to prevent that?
There already is in place. I don't really agree with Constantine's point, to be honest, about I suppose what you brought, and Rami as well, saying about Islamophobia. I think Islamophobia definitely does exist. In the UK, just in the UK, there is already, the government has a strategy that's called Prevent, which is basically preventing radicalization across the country, specifically Islamist radicalization. And that's already used against organizations that are associated with the Muslim Brotherhood. They don't shut them down because they allow them because of free speech, but they call them up when it comes to issues to do with hate speech. So if an organization that's related to the Muslim Brotherhood, or potentially not, maybe it's a different organization that's much more extremist, much more jihadist related and associated with ISIS, for example, if they make a claim that's indicative of hate speech, that falls under the Prevent policy. they will be stopped from doing that. They could be arrested. For example, they'll go into universities. If a student writes an essay that's full of hate speech, under the prevent policy, a university lecturer has to report that then to the university authorities, who will then report that to the police. So I think that there already is legislation in place. I think there's a difference. I think we have to be careful here, because it kind of seems like we're having a debate of it's black or white. We either have legislation that entirely shuts down these organizations, and if we don't have that, then the Muslim Brotherhood is mushrooming across the EU, or even in Britain as well. I don't think it's that clear cut. I think it's a case of countries in the West, particularly in Europe and in the UK also, have to have policies like Prevent that ensure that we're keeping an eye on the Muslim Brotherhood and making certain that it doesn't evolve and fall into that more radicalized hate speech, more violent area, but allowing them to operate at the same time, because it's a democracy and they do have the entitlement of freedom of speech, but they also have the entitlement to respect the values of the state that they are resident in, if that makes sense. So I think we have to have a balanced view. I think the idea that Islamophobia is a myth, I don't agree with that at all. It's true that some Muslim Brotherhood organizations and some jihadist organizations might use Islamophobia as an excuse to defend their actions. At the same time, it has been proven, whether it's across media newspapers in the UK, for example, or France, that Islamophobia in terms of language is used all the time. So it's quite prevalent. And I think you'll find that organizations that are secular organizations that are not partisan and that are not in any way cooperating with the Muslim Brotherhood will all very clearly state that Islamophobia is a definite issue across the European Union. So I don't really agree with that statement. But I mean, as I say, legislation exists in these countries already to stop hate speech. You can stop hate speech and also have freedom of speech at the same time.
Thank you. By the way, my son did his master's in UCL about the prevent this policy. So and he did it in the schools level. So it is very strong one. So it is doing many things.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Okay.
And just maybe shortly reply to that, because maybe I didn't make myself quite clear. At the same time, also, I think we can talk about that probably for 3 hours. I'm sure there is hatred towards Muslims in all European countries, also in Germany. I see that people just hate Muslims, Muslim migrants. I have a problem with the term Islamophobia because it stigmatizes people and says they are sick, like arachnophobia, something like it's an ailment that you have. If you had that sort of feeling. So I have a problem with the term, not with the phenomenon, because I'm quite sure that I'm not sure. I think there is no doubt that it is a serious problem that in many European countries there is movements even that are full of hatred towards Muslims. But I personally, and I know there is a discussion about the term, but I also I don't like the term Islamophobia because it implies a sickness. We wouldn't use that term when it comes to other religions, for instance.
Yes. And it is now is Russian phobia and Chinese phobia and many phobias there. So it is, but at least I think this issue needs to be discussed. I think Trends might think of organizing a symposium about this kind of the issue of Islamophobia. Is it myth or reality? How it's been manipulated by some people, or is it? But it's there. I feel it is there. Some part of it is there. Like Daniel Bibes in America is clear Islamophobic discourse, no doubt about it. But we cannot generalize. Dr. Rami, is there any? We will conclude in 5 minutes, so it will be between you and Dr. Iman. Is there any possible, chance for European countries to issue some legal decrees or laws to organize the financial sector of the Muslim Brothers? We are talking about everything except the financial issues. Yusuf Nada Al-Lugano is running the central bank of Muslim Brothers. The halal food is a gold mine for Muslim Brothers. It's taken for $1 per kilogram for halal food. So it is a huge thing. A huge thing source to be discussed. So is there any possible chance for reorganizing this kind of financial black, box of the Muslim Brothers?
Yeah, it's a big question. Thanks for this question. But honestly, there is a kind of state of agreement, as I referred in my presentation, between European countries about there is a real threat came from the Muslim Brotherhood. Financially, halal and donation and raising money from outside, especially from Turkey, from Qatar, it's alarming for European, but they can't stop it yet. But we have some promising signs inside Europe. It came from France after the law of anti-separatism and the recent actions in Austria. So I think what the other countries need to do to face this real threat of the Muslim Brotherhood, to put the political correctness away and can face the problems in its names and call the things in its names, and don't be afraid from using Islamophobia as a shield from the side of the Muslim Brotherhood to protect themselves. Government working based in proofs, solid evidence. So they have to publish this solid evidence and proofs to the public and say the Muslim Brotherhood, this is the reality of the Muslim Brotherhood, and using the experiment of the Muslim Brotherhood after the Arab Spring to tell the European people about the truth of those people. So for financial resources, I think for halal, it's not easy to control it, because there's nothing against halal, but the problem that in the way that the Muslim Brotherhood exploded the halal food to make it as a main source for them. According to the recent statistic in 2017, halal trade volumes across the world become $2.3 billion. We are talking about, $2.3 trillion. It's a huge source of income for them. It's a long way to confront the Muslim Brotherhood, especially in Europe. But I see there is a promising future by France and Austria, and I think the rest of the European country will come, but it's a matter of time.
Thank you, Dr. Iman. The last question, and we'll close in 2 minutes. So it is. Do you think that the Taliban case will play negative role for the Muslim Brothers, especially when it comes to the women issues, or the Taliban stand from women, taking in consideration that Muslim Brothers in the last 50 years overlapped with Salafism, with jihadism, so we cannot say Muslim Brothers ideologically are separate or distinct clearly from Salafis and jihadists. So the Taliban image regarding all the issues of modernity and women issues can play negative role in the eyes of the public opinion against the Muslim Brothers, and the people will be afraid that if we will be ruled by Muslim Brothers, we'll be treated like Taliban.
Well, I thank you, Dr. Nasser, for raising this question, but I think Taliban model and what is going on in Afghanistan actually is not having a negative impact on the Muslim Brotherhood. As I have already explained in my contribution, what I think is that it is going to have a positive impact on the situation of the Muslim Brotherhood and how it will act in the coming 5 years, for example. The thing that you referred to regarding the conservative view of Taliban when it comes to women empowerment and the structure of the society in Afghanistan, I think this is an Afghani issue per se. The Muslim Brotherhood, as has been uncovered to us since 2011, have a different views. They are more flexible when it comes to empowering women, as long as women are aligned with the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood. Muslim Brotherhoods are having this more stable ideology that has been passed from a generation to another. And even though the 2013 revolution in Egypt and the backlash they are suffering from in Tunisia, for example, is not changing a lot the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood. So in a short response to your question, Taliban will not have a negative impact on the Muslim Brotherhood. Okay. Instead, it will be very positive due to the revival of the political ambition of the Muslim Brotherhood. And many countries in Europe actually are considering the Muslim Brotherhood as a moderate Islamic group that should be empowered and be considered as an opposition group in Egypt and UAE and other Arab countries. And this new attitude from European countries is just will open another door for the Muslim Brotherhood.
Thank you so much. Thank you, our distinguished speakers, Dr. Rami Aziz, Dr. Iman Ragab, Mr. Konstantin Schreiber, and Dr. Gillian Kennedy. Thank you so much for your contribution for today's symposium. Is very, and you enrich this subject, and you open many issues to be discussed in future symposia or for researchers. Thank you so much, and thanks for Trends staff and team. Thank you so much, and goodbye. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.